Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We are 19 days out from Election Day, and the Harris-Walz campaign is betting big that there are more Americans who care about and want to preserve our democracy than those who don't. And it's because Donald Trump simply cannot stop reminding everyone what happened on January 6, 2021. It might, in fact, be the moment of his presidency he's most proud of.
You had hundreds of thousands of people come to Washington. They didn't come because of me. They came because of the election. They thought the election was a rigged election, and that's why they came. Some of those people went down to the Capitol. I said peacefully and patriotically, nothing done wrong at all, nothing done wrong. And action was taken, strong action. Ashley Babbitt was killed. Nobody was killed. There were no guns down there. We didn't have guns. The others had guns, but we didn't have guns. And when I say we, these are people that walked down. This was a tiny percentage of the overall, which nobody sees and nobody shows. But that was a day of love.
That was Trump's answer when he was asked explicitly by the man you saw on the left part of your screen, an undecided voter, to win his vote back by apologizing, essentially, for the January 6th insurrection in a town hall yesterday. We didn't have the guns, he said. The others had guns. Now, first of all, there were Trump supporters with guns at the Capitol. We know that now. Setting that aside, notice how he structures that sentence. He's referring to the violent mob and the rioters and the people that assaulted police officers as we, his people, his team, the guys who desecrated the Capitol and ransacked offices and chanted "Hang Mike Pence" and brutally bashed the heads in of cops. That's the we. We, the others, the other side, the other team with guns, the ones on the other side, those, well, who was that? Well, those were the cops who defended the Capitol and our constitutional republic itself. Trump has declared the two teams here, him and the rioters on one, the rest of us on the other. Because, again, he agrees with what the rioters did. He wishes they'd been successful. Today, Kamala Harris issued a direct rebuttal to those very remarks to voters in Wisconsin.
So now we here know January 6th was a tragic day. It was a day of terrible violence. There were attacks on law enforcement. 140 law enforcement officers were injured. Some were killed. And what did Donald Trump say last night about January 6th? He called it a, quote, a day of love. But it points out something that everyone here knows. The American people are exhausted with his gaslighting. Exhausted with his gaslighting. Enough!
Harris knows that voters correctly find what happened on January 6th indefensible. Majorities do. Trump and his fellow Republicans are doing everything they can to make voters forget about it. This is really central, right? I mean, his hand-picked Supreme Court certainly helped enormously by granting his ludicrous request for total immunity and intentionally making sure that the criminal January 6th case got delayed past the election. Republican politicians who were at the Capitol during the insurrection are not forgotten, at least not privately. Those people know what he did was despicable. And I use that word despicable specifically because it is how Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell refers to Trump. According to a new book, amid Trump's efforts to overturn the election, McConnell called him a despicable human being, stupid and ill-tempered. McConnell also apparently sobbed to his staff after the insurrection, and he privately lamented that Trump should have to pay a price for the attack. Mitch McConnell isn't denying his disparaging comments about his party's current nominee for president. Whatever I may have said about President Trump pales in comparison to what J.D. Vance, Lindsey Graham, and others have said about him, but we are all on the same team now. And he is right about that. Because, as Donald Trump, to his credit, pointed out, there are two teams here. There is the team that wants to preserve American democracy and the rule of law, and there is the team trying to overturn it. For Donald Trump, that's we versus the others. Mitch McConnell is with the we. He is part of the same despicable team as Donald Trump. Don't forget, Mitch McConnell ran the Senate during Trump's second impeachment after January 6th, and he very well could have whipped votes to convict Trump. And had he done so and had been successful, it would have removed him from the possibility of public office. He couldn't have run again. And McConnell chose not to do that. And now Trump is running again, and McConnell is right by his side. I think the biggest hope I have is that voters do remember how terrible January 6th was. Because remember, in the hours and days and weeks after the attack, it really did feel like Trump might finally be finished. Look at this graph. I think about this graph all the time, okay? This shows Trump's favorability throughout his 4 years as president. The orange line is his disapproval rating. A majority disapproving most of the time. Green line, his approval rating. See how it reaches its lowest point ever at the very end there? January 2021, the immediate aftermath of the violent insurrection that he led. His favorability ratings were nearly 20 points underwater. What Trump did that day, sitting idly by while his supporters tried to end American democracy and, in fact, encouraging them, is disqualifying. Listen to how Trump's longtime friend, billionaire Robert Kraft, put it.
Donald Trump became a social friend in the early 90s when I was going down to Florida. And then when my wife of blessed memory died 13 years ago, he was one of 4 or 5 people who reached out to me and was really, really nice. I was very upset what happened January 6th.
He led an insurrection in this country.
Pardon?
I think he led an insurrection in this country. Yeah.
And I haven't talked to him since then.
After January 6th, Republicans understood what Trump did was a disaster, both morally and politically. Remember? Even his friends on Fox News admitted as much privately.
Quote, Mark, the president needs to tell people in the Capitol to go home. This is hurting all of us. He is destroying his legacy, Laura Ingraham wrote. Please get him on TV. Destroying everything you have accomplished, Brian Kilmeade texted. Quote, can he make a statement? Ask people to leave the Capitol, Sean Hannity urged.
Now, he didn't want to do that at the time because he was too busy watching it and eating and hoping that the rioters were victorious. Now, those very same folks, the same individuals quoted there in the Republican Party and on Fox, they are working night and day to just wipe your memories, actively collaborating with this despicable human being by covering up his despicable plan to end the American Republic as we know it. They don't want you to think about the horrors of January 6th while you're filling out your ballot. Just listen to J.D. Vance today.
The media loves to talk about January the 6th. And of course, January the 6th of 2021, if you were violent, if you committed acts of violence, then you should be prosecuted for them. Everybody believes that.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Does everyone believe that, JD? Because Donald Trump thinks it was a day of love. He refers to himself as part of the mob. And by the way, promising to pardon the violent rioters. If he wins, he will do it on day one. The biggest obstacle for folks like Vance and Laura Ingraham and Mitch McConnell and all these people who want to just, make you forget it all. The biggest obstacle to their plan is Donald Trump himself, who absolutely refuses to run away from what he did on January 6th because he is proud of it. He wants to do it again. He's trying to do it again. He keeps saying so out loud. The only silver lining is that his pride in his despicable actions may end up being his own downfall.